With Tales of Iron 2 just around the corner, it felt very appropriate to revisit the game that started it all. Which personally, I couldn't even bother to finish after only 4 hours due to the obsessive backtracking and frustrating fat rolling gameplay. Regardless of whether light, medium, or heavy equipment was equipped, it just seemed like it had too many issues. If you feel like you need to play through Tales of Iron before you play through Tales of Iron 2, this is all you need to know. It's unrefined, repetitive, and doesn't have a whole lot of substance. But it's definitely one of those rough diamonds that simply needed a little bit of polish to succeed. In general, the game is quite fascinating at first, but swiftly begins to show you just how little thought went into the progressional unlocks. It doesn't seem like an action RPG or a Soulslike, but rather a very short and well-narrated storybook. During the Trial of Ascension, you play as Reggie, the youngest heir to the throne of the Rat Kingdom. Unfortunately, upon claiming the right to said kingdom, their kingdom is suddenly raided by the Frog Clan and their leader, Greenward, who has come to eradicate them all. Reggie's family is ambushed, and he is nearly killed as well. Coming to his wits, he realizes what has happened. His father has been killed, the throne is vacant, and he is one of the few brothers left to rule the kingdom and restore peace to his once thriving homeland. It's presented in the styles and feelings of a storybook with a sprinkle of Geralt from Rivia-style narration that works occasionally but can also be quite annoying after a while.
For centuries and longer, rats have fought tirelessly to repel the incessant frog invasions.
It just sounded like the voice was trying to be something that it wasn't, which was a dark and scary story. The story itself was fantastically spoken, but it just sounded a bit too uncanny for my liking. There was something off about the combat itself. Physically playing as Reggie and moving around feels a bit weird, as if the input is slightly delayed like a wind-up. The same could be said about dodging because it's more about timing it correctly. There's a very high chance that Reggie will be more likely to just run into the AoE at the end of it or into another enemy strike, which simply ends up putting him into a chain stun, which on higher difficulties is a death sentence. The gameplay itself is primarily made up of very linear fetch quests, and there aren't many features here that give you any reason to go out and look for a lot of the equipment or gear, aside from finding some of the unique items that give you a different visual style, which simply allows you to dress up Reggie in interesting and unique ways to make the game harder or even easier for yourself. It really just comes down to the real motivation behind actually wanting to continue the story. You're a rat king that needs to rebuild his kingdom, and to do so, you, and only you, have to head out and do a bunch of drawn-out repetitive quests, as they call it, but really it's nothing but tedious chores which are practically all the same thing. Hey, head down into the sewers and kill some bugs behind a bunch of vines. Return to the quest board? Congratulations. Now go ahead and do that again, and don't worry, we will respawn all of the vines so that it becomes much more drawn out than necessary. You could quite frankly beat this game in about 2 to 3 hours if not for the incessantly forced need to do everything individually instead of all together. It's tough to decide whether Tales of Iron is difficult because it appears to be a defective game in a variety of different ways, making it feel more artificially challenging or just not that fun to actually play through, whether it's because of the combat itself or just the backtracking specifically, which doesn't need to be so repetitive, with very long stretches of zones to run back through with nothing new to gain. All of the quests are given out one at a time, so if you have multiple down in the sewers or in the mole caves or just about anywhere, really just have fun picking them up because you're going to be going to these locations multiple times, backtracking to the quest board and repeating the same process over and over again, consuming an unnecessary 2-hour time sink of just walking back and forth, which is always going to be for a fetch quest to earn enough gold to be able to pay for repairs. Think of it like this. You go to the grocery store and get some groceries. You bring it all home, and instead of taking as much as you can in one trip out of your car, preferably to avoid having to keep coming in and out of your house, you simply take each individual item, not even the bag. Instead of wasting time, get it all done in one trip. One might think that this isn't much of a concern, but that thinking fades away gradually after the complete picture of the situation becomes clear. It's highly likely to make you very bored. There's also a lot of waiting for enemies to actually appear in the foreground from the background, while also being impervious to damage when they actually show up if you kill the previous enemies too quickly. Additionally, there is a big issue with the non-stop knockbacks when there are several enemies on the screen with the poorly thought out AoE design for some of the larger enemies. If you don't use your dodges correctly, you'll just end up dodging straight into another knockback and then into another, which just doesn't make the game feel great. Originally, Tales of Iron wasn't something that I ever planned on finishing, because honestly, it was very boring. I gave up 4 hours into a normal playthrough once the backtracking became so drawn out and just suffocating. Coming back and finishing the game has left me feeling the exact same way. It's just a game that I don't see the original hype for. It's for those who want something challenging and remotely Souls-like, but outside of that, nothing really stands out besides the story and the underlying combat. It's as if the developers were blind to the simple understanding about what makes a game very interesting, rewarding, and actually fun to play through. During the credits, I made a joke about how it felt appropriate for the devs to portray themselves as mole people with terrible eyesight because of how it felt like they didn't have a clear vision of how poorly developed their systems were. There could have been numerous different ways that they could have developed them better and more well thought out to not not feel like a hindrance to the one playing. So in short, Tales of Iron is pretty simple. It seems like a cross between a Soulslike and many other elements in the worst way possible. There really wasn't any need to draw out every single minor fetch quest so many times when it all could have been done in one trip. The combat was very clunky at times, but there was a feeling like it could have been a lot more fun with a little bit more polish. I do sincerely hope that with the time in development for Tales of Iron 2 that these developers had enough time to take honest feedback on the issues that afflicted the first game in order to make the second game 10 times better. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see for ourselves.